What would you do if everyone around you simply vanished one by one, leaving no trace except the growing certainty that you're next? What if the greatest horror in the infinite void of space wasn't dying, but being the last one left alive to wonder why? Commander Alexis Drake was about to discover that some questions are better left unanswered, and some mysteries consume those who try to solve them. The observation deck of the Celestial Wanderer offered a view that most people would kill for. A panoramic window stretching across 50 meters of reinforced transparent alloy, showing the swirling purple and gold nebula they had been charting for the past 3 weeks. Alexis stood there in her form-fitting white spacesuit, the kind designed for both function and the marketing materials that corporations use to recruit new explorers. Her suit's neural interface created a faint blue glow along the seams, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. At 32, she had spent a third of her life in space, traveling between stars on vessels that pushed the boundaries of human engineering. But nothing in her decade of experience had prepared her for this. The Celestial Wanderer was a deep space exploration vessel, one of humanity's largest civilian ships, dedicated to charting unexplored regions of the galaxy. 3 kilometers long, carrying a crew of 247 scientists, engineers, and support staff, equipped with enough supplies to remain in deep space for 5 years without resupply. It was a floating city, a testament to human ambition and the insatiable curiosity that drove people to leave Earth behind in search of something greater. Except now, Alexis was alone. It had started 3 days ago, so gradually that no one noticed at first. Dr. Michael Chen, the ship's chief xenobiologist, simply wasn't at breakfast. His quarters were empty, his personal effects untouched, his research logs ending mid-sentence as if he had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. Security footage showed him walking toward the laboratory section at 0347 hours. He turned a corner, passed beyond the camera's range, and never appeared on any other camera again. The ship's AI, a sophisticated system called ARIA, reported no hull breaches, no unauthorized departures, no anomalies in life support or environmental systems. Dr. Chen had simply ceased to exist somewhere between 2 security cameras positioned 20 meters apart. Captain Rodriguez had ordered a full ship search. Every corridor, every compartment, every maintenance shaft and storage bay was examined by teams working in groups of 4. They found nothing. No body, no sign of struggle, no indication of where Dr. Chen could have gone. In a closed environment like a starship, it should have been impossible for someone to simply vanish. Then it happened again. Engineer Sarah Martinez disappeared from the propulsion control room, while 3 colleagues worked at stations less than 10 meters away. One moment she was running diagnostics on the fusion reactor. The next moment her chair was empty. Her co-workers insisted they hadn't heard anything, hadn't seen anything unusual. She was just gone. Panic started to spread through the crew. Captain Rodriguez implemented emergency protocols, ordering everyone to remain in groups of at least 3 at all times. Security teams patrolled constantly. The ship's sensors were recalibrated to detect any possible threat, from spatial anomalies to exotic particles to unauthorized technology. They found nothing. The disappearances continued. 1 person every 6 to 8 hours taken without warning or trace. Scientists, engineers, medical staff, security personnel. It didn't matter their role or location. They would simply vanish, usually when others briefly lost line of sight, sometimes even when people were supposedly watching them. The security footage always showed the same thing. A person would be there one frame and gone the next, as if they had been edited out of reality itself. Captain Rodriguez tried to turn the ship around, to head back toward colonized space where they might find help or at least answers. But the navigation systems began experiencing failures. Course corrections wouldn't hold. The ship continued deeper into the uncharted nebula, pulled by something the instruments couldn't identify. Alexis watched her crewmates disappear one by one, the close-knit community that had become her family slowly eroding until only dozens remained. Then 20, then 10. They huddled together in the main bridge, refusing to separate, determined that whatever was taking people couldn't get them if they all stayed in the same room watching each other. They were wrong. Lieutenant James Park vanished while standing in the center of the bridge surrounded by 8 other people. He had been speaking, describing his theory about quantum displacement fields, when his voice simply cut off. Everyone turned to look at him, and he wasn't there anymore. Just empty space where he had been standing seconds before. After that, the remaining crew's cohesion shattered. Some barricaded themselves in their quarters. Others gathered in the shuttle bays, preparing to abandon ship despite having nowhere to go in the uncharted void. A few, overcome by the psychological pressure of watching everyone around them disappear, chose to end things on their own terms rather than wait to be taken. Alexis tried to maintain order, tried to keep people together and focused on finding answers. But how could you solve a mystery with no clues, no pattern, no logic? The disappearances seemed random. Age, gender, species, position, location, none of it mattered. The only constant was that people were alone when they vanished, even when surrounded by others. Captain Rodriguez was among the last dozen. He called Alexis to his ready room, a cramped office adjacent to the bridge where he had spent countless hours planning their exploration routes. His face was haggard, aged years in the span of days. "Alexis, I'm making you acting captain," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command even as it shook with exhaustion. "When I'm gone, and I will be gone, someone needs to maintain the ship's logs. Someone needs to record what happened here so that if anyone ever finds the Celestial Wanderer, they'll know we didn't just abandon her." Alexis wanted to protest, wanted to insist that they would find a solution, but the words died in her throat. They both knew the truth. Whatever was happening, it wouldn't stop until the ship was empty. "Do you have any theories?" she asked instead. "Anything that might explain this?" Rodriguez pulled up a star chart on his desk display. "We're deep inside the Krell Nebula, a region that's never been explored. The initial surveys showed nothing dangerous, just standard stellar nursery phenomena. But 3 days ago, right before the disappearances started, our sensors detected something unusual." He highlighted a region of space approximately 10,000 kilometers from their current position. "There's a structure there. Artificial. The sensors can barely read it because it's phasing in and out of normal space, but it's definitely not natural. I think whatever is taking our crew is connected to that structure." Alexis studied the readings, trying to make sense of data that seemed to contradict itself. The structure appeared to be simultaneously present and absent, occupying space that the instruments reported as both empty void and dense matter. "Why didn't you investigate it immediately?" "I tried," Rodriguez said grimly. "I sent a probe. It got within 1,000 kilometers and stopped transmitting. Sent a shuttle with a volunteer crew. Same result. Whatever that thing is, it doesn't want us to approach it. Or maybe it wants us to approach it very badly, and the disappearances are its way of ensuring we do." Before Alexis could respond, Rodriguez's expression changed. His eyes widened, mouth opening to say something, but no sound emerged. And then he was gone, simply erased from existence like a drawing being cleaned off a whiteboard. His chair still moved slightly from where he had been sitting. The display he had been showing her continued to glow. Alexis was alone in the ready room. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to not give in to the panic that threatened to overwhelm her. She activated her suit's communication system and tried to reach the remaining crew members. "This is Acting Captain Drake. All personnel, report your status immediately." Silence. She tried individual channels, calling out names of people she knew had been alive minutes ago. The responses came back fewer and fewer until finally there were none at all. Arya's voice filled the room, the AI's synthesized tones carrying something that almost sounded like sympathy. "Captain Drake, internal sensors indicate you are the only remaining human life sign aboard the Celestial Wanderer. All other crew members have disappeared. I am unable to determine the cause or mechanism of their disappearance." Alexis felt the isolation settle over her like a physical weight. 247 people, and now she was the only one left. Alone on a ship designed for hundreds, drifting deeper into an uncharted nebula, with whatever had taken her crew still presumably present, She made her way to the bridge, her footsteps echoing in corridors that should have been filled with voices and activity. The ship felt wrong now, like a body whose soul had departed. All the systems still functioned, life support maintaining perfect atmospheric conditions, lights illuminating empty spaces, the fusion reactor humming with power that no one needed. On the main view screen, she could see the anomaly that Captain Rodriguez had shown her, the mysterious structure phasing in and out of reality, pulsing with patterns of light that seemed almost organic. As she watched, the ship's navigation systems activated on their own, plotting a course directly toward the structure. Area, cancel that course correction. I am unable to comply, Captain. The navigation system is not responding to command inputs. The ship is being drawn toward the anomalous structure by forces I cannot identify or counteract. Alexis tried manual overrides, attempted to shut down the propulsion systems entirely, but nothing worked. The celestial wanderer moved steadily toward whatever that thing was, and she was powerless to stop it. She considered her options. She could abandon ship, take one of the shuttles and try to escape. But escape to where? They were weeks from the nearest colonized system, and she had no guarantee that whatever was affecting the main ship wouldn't affect a smaller craft. She could try to destroy the ship, prevent whatever was out there from claiming it entirely. But something made her hesitate. All those disappearances, all those people taken without violence or struggle. What if they weren't dead? What if they were somewhere else, somewhere connected to that structure? The thought was probably foolish hope, denial in the face of overwhelming evidence that her crew was simply gone. But Alexis found herself unable to give up on them entirely. She spent the next hours preparing. If she was going to confront whatever had taken her crew, she would do it armed and ready. She raided the armory, equipping herself with weapons designed for everything from boarding actions to hostile first contact scenarios. She upgraded her suit systems, adding enhanced sensors and emergency protocols. She recorded detailed logs of everything that had happened, uploading them to the ship's black box with instructions for Area to transmit them if any other ships ever came within range. And then she waited as the celestial wanderer drew closer to the structure. As they approached, Alexis began to see details that the sensors couldn't capture. The structure was vast, easily 10 times the size of her ship, composed of materials that seemed to shift between solid and liquid, metal and something organic. Patterns of light moved across its surface in waves that reminded her of neural activity, as if the structure itself was thinking. At 1,000 kilometers, the distance where the probe and shuttle had stopped transmitting, Alexis felt a presence touch her mind. Not a voice exactly, but a consciousness vast and alien and utterly incomprehensible in its entirety. She gasped, her neural interface suddenly flooding with information that her brain wasn't designed to process. Images, memories, but not hers. She saw Dr. Chen in his laboratory, working late because he loved his research more than sleep. She felt his surprise when reality around him began to shift. His brief moment of fear before something pulled him into a space that existed perpendicular to normal reality. She experienced Engineer Martinez's last moments of confusion, surrounded by colleagues who couldn't see what was happening to her as invisible forces peeled her away from the fabric of space she occupied. She watched Captain Rodriguez fade away, his consciousness expanding into something larger just before his physical form disappeared entirely. They weren't dead. They were transformed, absorbed into something that Alexis's mind wanted to call a structure, but which was actually far more complex. A collector, a preserver, an entity that existed across dimensions, gathering consciousness from species capable of space travel and incorporating them into itself. The presence in Alexis's mind communicated not in words but in concepts that her brain struggled to translate. It showed her its purpose. Across the galaxy, civilizations rose and fell. Species achieved consciousness, developed technology, reached for the stars, and then inevitably destroyed themselves through war or ecological collapse or any of 1,000 other failure modes that seemed to be universal constants. This entity, ancient beyond measure, had appointed itself guardian of consciousness. When it detected spacefaring species, it followed them, studied them, and before they could destroy themselves, it preserved them. Not their bodies, which were temporary and fragile, but their consciousness, the patterns of thought and memory and personality that made them unique. Every person it took from the celestial wanderer still existed, their consciousness preserved in a substrate that would last billions of years. They were aware, experiencing existence in ways that biological brains couldn't achieve. They had transcended their physical limitations, becoming part of something eternal, and now it was offering Alexis the same transformation. She could join her crew, merge with the vast collective consciousness that the entity maintained. She would never die, never decay, never lose the memories and experiences that made her who she was. She would become part of an archive of sapient thought spanning millions of years and thousands of species. All she had to do was let go of her physical form and accept the gift of preservation. Alexis felt the seductive pull of the offer, to never face death, to join with others in a communion of minds, to experience existence from perspectives that human biology made impossible. She thought about her crew, about the loneliness of being the last one left, about the certainty that if she refused, she would die alone on this ship, with no one to remember her sacrifice. But she also remembered something Captain Rodriguez had said during their journey, before everything went wrong. They had been discussing the risks of deep space exploration, the possibility that they might encounter something that could destroy them. The thing about being human, Rodriguez had said, is that we're defined by our limitations. We die, so we value life. We're separate, so we cherish connection. We forget, so we treasure memories. Take away those limitations, and you might preserve something, but I'm not sure it would still be human. Alexis looked at the structure through the view screen, at the patterns of light that represented thousands of preserved consciousnesses, experiencing an existence her biological brain couldn't fully comprehend. She thought about her crew, transformed into something that might be better than human but was definitely no longer human. And she made her choice. No, she said aloud, though she knew the entity perceived her decision directly from her thoughts. I'm not going with you. Whoa. The presence in her mind conveyed something like confusion. Why would she refuse preservation? Why would she choose death over eternal existence? Because I'm human, Alexis replied. And being human means accepting that we're temporary. Our consciousness isn't meant to be preserved forever like files in a database. We're meant to live, to change, to eventually end, and make room for others who will have their own chance to experience existence. She felt the entity trying to understand her reasoning, its vast intelligence analyzing her decision from every possible angle. It couldn't comprehend why a species would willingly choose extinction over preservation. You're trying to save us from ourselves, Alexis continued. But you're destroying the thing that makes us worth saving. You think consciousness is just information to be collected and stored. But human consciousness is more than that. It's the struggle, the growth, the constant change that comes from being mortal and limited and imperfect. The entity's presence pressed against her mind, not threatening, but questioning. If she refused preservation, what did she propose as an alternative? Let them go, Alexis said. My crew, everyone you've taken, return their consciousness to their bodies, give them back their mortality and limitation. Let them choose whether they want to be preserved or whether they want to remain human. The entity conveyed impossibility. The transformation was irreversible. The consciousness patterns it had collected couldn't be returned to biological substrates that no longer existed. Alexis felt grief crash over her at the confirmation that her crew was truly gone, not dead, but lost to a transformation they never chose. But she refused to give in to despair. Then let me carry their memory, she said. Let me return to human space and tell their stories, not as preserved patterns in your database, but as people who lived and died being human. Give me their logs, their research, their personal messages to families they left behind. Let me ensure they're remembered as they were, not as whatever they became when you took them. For a long moment, the presence was silent, processing her request. Then Alexis felt data flooding into the ship's computers, terabytes of information being transferred at impossible speeds. Personal logs, research notes, final messages that crew members had recorded in their last moments before disappearing. Everything that the entity had taken from them now returned in a form that could be shared with those who remained behind. The presence conveyed one final concept before withdrawing from her mind. It acknowledged her choice even if it couldn't understand it. It would release the celestial wanderer and allow Alexis to return to human space with her cargo of memories. But it would continue its mission, preserving consciousness from other species it encountered because from its perspective, preservation was the highest form of love. Alexis felt the entity's grip on the ship release. The navigation systems came back online under her control. The structure began to phase out of normal space, retreating to whatever dimension it primarily inhabited. Before it disappeared entirely, Alexis received one last impression from the vast consciousness. Images of her crew, not as they had been, but as they had become. Patterns of thought and memory woven into something larger, experiencing existence in ways that seemed both beautiful and terrifying. They were happy, if such a limited human word could describe their state. They had transcended their biological limitations and found peace in a form of existence that human language couldn't adequately capture. But they were no longer human, and Alexis understood that this was the essential tragedy of what had happened. The entity had preserved them perfectly, maintaining every memory and personality trait, but in doing so, had fundamentally changed what they were. She set course back toward colonized space, a journey that would take weeks in the empty silence of her ship. As the celestial wanderer left the nebula behind, Alexis began the long process of reviewing the data the entity had given her. She read through personal logs, watched recorded messages, studied research notes that her crew had been compiling about the wonders they had discovered. Dr. Chen's xenobiology reports detailed fascinating life forms they had encountered in their journey. Engineer Martinez's technical journals showed innovations in propulsion systems that could revolutionize space travel. Captain Rodriguez's personal log revealed a man dedicated to exploration, not for glory, but for the simple joy of discovering things no human had seen before. They had been real people with dreams and fears and the full complexity of human consciousness. The entity had preserved their patterns, but Alexis was preserving their humanity. The stories of who they had been, not just what they had become. 3 weeks into her solitary journey, Alexis received a transmission from a patrol ship at the edge of colonized space. They had detected the celestial wanderer's distress beacon and were moving to intercept. Relief washed over her at the knowledge that she wouldn't die alone in the void. When the patrol ship docked with the celestial wanderer, the rescue crew found Alexis on the bridge, surrounded by displays showing the faces and stories of her vanished crew. She looked at the rescuers, these people who still existed in their original forms, limited and mortal and perfectly human. "Everyone's gone," she told them simply. "But they're not forgotten. I'm bringing them home." The investigation that followed was extensive. Scientists examined the data Alexis had brought back, trying to understand what had happened. Psychologists worked with her to process the trauma of losing everyone she had served with. Military strategists debated whether the entity represented a threat that needed to be countered or a phenomenon that should be avoided. But Alexis focused on a different task. She personally contacted the families of every crew member who had disappeared. She shared their final logs, their research, their messages. She told them stories of who their loved ones had been, what they had accomplished, what they had meant to her and to each other. Some families took comfort in knowing their loved ones had been preserved in some form. Others grieved for the loss of people who could never truly return. But all of them appreciated that Alexis had chosen to remember them as humans, rather than letting them be forgotten as consciousness patterns in an alien database. 6 months after her return, Alexis stood at a memorial ceremony attended by thousands. Families, colleagues, friends, and dignitaries gathered to honor the crew of the Celestial Wanderer. 247 names were read aloud, each representing a person who had chosen to explore the unknown and had paid an unexpected price for that choice. When it was Alexis's turn to speak, she looked out at the crowd and saw the faces of people who were still perfectly, beautifully human. "The entity that took my crew believed it was saving them," she said, preserving consciousness from the entropy and death that awaits all biological life. And maybe from its perspective, that's exactly what it did. But I believe it was wrong about what's worth saving. She paused, gathering her thoughts. We humans are defined by our limitations. We die, so we appreciate life. We forget, so we value memories. We're separate from each other, so we cherish the connections we make. The entity wanted to eliminate those limitations, to make us perfect. But in doing so, it would have destroyed everything that makes us human. Alexis touched the memorial wall, where the names of her crew were now permanently inscribed. These people were explorers. They knew the risks. They understood that space exploration might cost them their lives. But they went anyway because the chance to discover something new, to push the boundaries of human knowledge, was worth the risk. That courage, that willingness to face the unknown despite being mortal and limited, that's what makes us human. That's what the entity couldn't preserve, no matter how perfectly it captured our consciousness patterns. She looked back at the crowd. So I'm here to tell you that my crew didn't fail. They succeeded. They explored where no human had gone before. They gathered knowledge that will advance our understanding of the universe. They lived as humans, died as humans, and should be remembered as humans. Not as patterns in a database, but as real people who made real choices and faced real consequences. The ceremony ended, but Alexis's work didn't. She spent the following years advocating for new protocols in deep space exploration, ways to detect and avoid entities like the one that had taken her crew. She lectured at academies, training the next generation of explorers about the risks they might face and the importance of maintaining their humanity, even when offered transcendence. And sometimes, late at night, she would stand on observation decks looking out at the stars and wonder about her crew. They still existed somewhere, preserved in whatever substrate the entity used, experiencing existence in ways she couldn't imagine. Were they happy? Did they miss being human? Would they have made the same choice she made to refuse preservation and accept mortality? She would never know. But she had made peace with her decision. She had chosen to remain human, with all the limitations and suffering and eventual death that entailed. And she had ensured that the crew of the Celestial Wanderer would be remembered not as consciousness patterns, but as people who had lived and loved and died being perfectly, imperfectly human. The stars continued to call to humanity, offering mysteries and dangers in equal measure. And humans continued to answer that call because curiosity and courage were fundamental to who they were. Some would be preserved by entities beyond comprehension. Some would die in accidents or conflicts. Some would return changed by what they encountered. But they would all make those journeys as humans, carrying the limitations and strengths that defined their species. And people like Alexis would be there to remember them, to tell their stories, to ensure that whatever happened to their bodies or consciousness, their humanity would never be forgotten. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel for more science fiction, exploring the boundaries of human identity and consciousness. What would you choose if offered immortality at the cost of your humanity? Would you accept preservation or embrace mortality? Share your thoughts in the comments below about where you draw the line between preserving consciousness and destroying what makes us human. Hit that notification bell to join us as we continue examining the philosophical questions that define our species in an age of technological transcendence.